I'm Miguel Badia, and today we are with the campus and social media campaign Get Woke Nova. So to start off, why don't you guys introduce yourselves and explain in a nutshell what is Get Woke Nova and what you guys do?
Sure, I can start off and then the last person can just kind of like wrap up and explain kind of what our organization does. But my name is Chloe Benson. I'm a rising senior and I've been a member of the leadership team for the last 3 years.
I can go next. My name is Michelle Charles. I'm also a rising senior. I've also been a member since my freshman year, and currently I'm a senior advisor.
My name is Michelle Idrovo. I'm a rising junior, and I've been a part of Get Woke Nova since my freshman year.
Cool. And my name is Michael Creighton. I'm a rising senior. I was the group outreach chair since my freshman year, but I'm now moving into a senior advisor role, or have moved into a senior advisor role. And I guess everyone can jump in, but to start, talk a little bit about Get Woke Nova. It was started in the spring of 2017 by a group of, I believe, 4 seniors in the Department of Communication for their senior thesis under the direction of Dr. Murray, Dr. Billy Murray, in the communication department. And what it started as was kind of a movement by a few Villanovans to speak directly to white Villanovans about what allyship means in terms of race, specifically for Black Villanovans and other Villanovans of color. And then it moved then to another group of undergraduates and has since evolved throughout the years to expanding allyship beyond race and including stories from a variety of different identities. I think that kind of covers a lot of things, but Chloe, Michelle?
Yeah. The only thing that I would add is that we started off as a predominantly social media-based campaign, and over the last 3 years, we've really evolved to create an on-campus presence. So we collaborate with a lot of groups on events. We host allyship workshops to teach groups and even classes about themes like diversity and inclusion and how to be a good ally. So I think that our on-campus presence has definitely grown a lot over the last few years.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, I think that a lot of people confuse us with campus organizations, but we are actually not run out of student involvement. We're run out of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And so we're just a campaign, and that's why we don't really have like a club member group. So we're run right now by 8 members of the leadership team that help run the campaign, but we're not a club or like student organization.
Yeah, so we don't have a general body, I think is what Chloe was saying.
Right,
yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, it's great to meet you guys. So the purpose of this interview is to help raise awareness and hopefully foster more dialogues and difficult conversations that we feel at VTV need to happen at Villanova. So to start off, our first question would be, how does Get Woke Nova help students who might otherwise feel marginalized at Villanova given its demographics?
I can start out. I think that one of the primary ways that Get Woke Nova does that is through our social media platform. So one of our, I think our primary kind of tenets is giving a platform to marginalized students to amplify their voices. So we provide a platform for people to share their experiences with being marginalized on campus and their experiences with discrimination or lack of allyship on campus. And I think that that is a really important way to get stories out and experiences out of students who are oftentimes silenced on campus or their voices are ignored. So I think that that is definitely one of the key ways that Get Woke Nova amplifies students of colors and other marginalized groups' voices.
Do you feel as if there are any barriers or obstacles that you guys face when it comes to handling racial issues on campus?
I can take this one. So I think that because we're not a student organization and we're not run out of student involvement or not tied to a specific office on campus that may be trying to market Villanova in a certain way, we have a lot of freedom. So like Chloe said earlier, we operate under the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I think because we are connected to them, it gives us a lot of license to really talk about these issues in an authentic way. I think maybe one challenge I could think of would be that for a lot of Villanova students, these conversations are particularly difficult. And I think that with Villanova having the demographics that it does, not everybody understands why these conversations need to be had, or if they are white, they don't understand why they need to be a part of these conversations. So I would say, you know, getting people involved and seeing why they need to buy into this would be a challenge that we face.
All right, so you mentioned a couple times that you guys are not run out of the Office of Student Involvement, that you guys are not necessarily a club on campus. Do you feel as if you receive the same treatment from the school administration as other organizations on campus? Or in other words, do you feel that your organization is as highly valued as maybe others that are run out of the Office of Student Involvement?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of us might have different opinions on this, but I think that we are definitely treated differently than student organizations because we're not a student organization. So I think that we have a lot of support from ODEI, which directly advises us and supports us. But I think, like Michelle just said, a lot of people don't really feel like they have a place in the conversation around race, and so they don't feel like they need to contribute in any way. And so in that sense, I think that maybe we don't have as much, I guess, support as like some other organizations. Like SPO, I think, is really like, you know, a huge, has a huge backing, I think. So I think that is like, personally for me, I think that that's kind of the difference between us and other organizations, is a lot of people just don't feel like they have like a stake in the conversation around race. But I'm sure other people have other opinions.
Yeah, I think also because we're relatively new, I think it's taken a few years to get our name out there and really get off the ground. I think that with the presence we've cultivated on social media and with all of the things that have been happening recently, it's kind of catapulted us into the spotlight as one of the main groups of students on campus that is doing this work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'd say that, you know, I think that in past years, it's been difficult for us to kind of get that recognition from university admin, but I think that we're definitely getting there.
So adding on to that, have you ever felt like you received any sort of negative feedback from either the student body or the school itself, or really anybody from the community?
I can start with this one. One thing that comes to mind is that, I don't know if this has been mentioned yet, but we sometimes do, or usually once a month, we do wish walls, which are like on-campus installations with a prompt. So could someone give an example of a wish wall we've done before?
Yeah, so one we've done is like, what does consent mean to you?
Yeah,
What
so
consent is.
right, yeah, and we have kind of like tags where people can write their response, put it on the wish wall, and that kind of is a way we have a little bit of dialogue within the community. Sometimes on these boards, though, is a place that we get negative feedback or negative responses. Particularly what I'm thinking of are students or perhaps other members of the Villanova community that just perhaps misunderstand our intentions and our goals. Or if our prompt mentions privilege, taking that as like a personal attack rather than like a systemic critique of the university and the problems that like we face. So it's always, we always do try and respond to these instances, whether it's a post on social media, kind of clarifying what our intent was, or using that as like an educational experience. So I'd say that's one way. Other thoughts, I guess?
The only thing that comes to mind for me is recently, so this past year I was in charge of like setting up the wish walls and taking them down. And I noticed that in a couple instances, people didn't put tags on the wish wall, but left them in kind of this little bin that we placed, and they would kind of just question what the term woke means. And I feel like recently we have gotten a little bit of backlash, claiming that we like self-claim ourselves to be the most woke organization on campus, or most woke campaign on campus, when that's not at all what we've tried to come across as. We've never like named ourselves that. So I guess there is some confusions with just the term and how people choose to interpret what our message is about. So
yeah, I think jumping off of that, I think that we have a 3-word like title of our campaign, and I feel like people really focus on that second word. And I like to explain to groups that I think not woke is not the most important part of who we are. I think it's the get that's the most important part of who we are. So I think that, you know, we always talk about how allyship and the process of getting woke is not, there's no end goal where you like wake up and say, okay, I've checked all these boxes and I'm woke now, or I've checked all these boxes and I'm an ally now. So I think that, you know, the people who run this campaign are constantly learning, and the way that we practice allyship and activism is constantly evolving. So I think, you know, I would love to see more people focus on the get part than the woke part, and, you know, the merits of that word itself.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Michelle, I would love if you could share more about like our collab with VSB and some of the challenges we had with that.
Yeah, so this was, I believe, I want to say 2 years ago, or was it 3 years ago?
2018.
So we had a pretty extensive collaboration in the works with the School of Business, and we found that through like the process of working with them to establish that, basically it was supposed to be a takeover type of day, like companies do in the business school, where they kind of have posters all over, they have things on the screen. So we were going to share student stories on the screens, have posters of student stories around the business school, as well as Get Woke Nova, our logo and our handle, so people could follow us on social media. Throughout the planning of this, it kind of got whittled down to just our logo and social media handles. And that was pretty frustrating because we felt like our voice didn't actually come through, but BSB kind of used our brand to appear woke without actually doing the work to amplify student voices and actually get there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that part of that, so part of our collaboration with them, we were going to have a wish wall on their like Bartley chalkboard, and it was about like whether or not students felt like VSB was an inclusive environment for all different kinds of students from different backgrounds. And the responses to the wish wall were overwhelmingly negative, of students saying they didn't feel like the business school was inclusive of their identities, and it was supposed to be up for a whole week, and they took it down after 2 days. And I think that that's the real challenge, I think, at Villanova is people, I think, you know, our institution wants to move in the direction of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I think when they get some of the negative responses of students' experiences, I think that it turns them off of the idea, and they want to get rid of it. They don't want to face a lot of the negative backlash, I think, that comes with moving toward inclusion and moving toward equity.
I think that just as Chloe, as you were speaking, it makes me think of the current conversation right now around the Black at Villanova Instagram and how we haven't had a university response. I think that what Chloe was sharing is somewhat similar in that sometimes the university chooses to just kind of look away perhaps, or pretend that something's not happening, even though there are like serious issues to address on our campus. So I think, like, to your question about is it indicative of a larger problem at Villanova, what we're facing? I'd say yes. And that's just the nature of the work, I would say.
All right, well, thank you for sharing that. So the next set of questions are focused more on individual experience and what you guys have personally seen on campus. So have you ever experienced or heard of any incidents at Villanova involving racism or where race was an issue?
Who wants to go first? I feel like we all probably have a story. I mean, I personally have experienced incidents like these, and I have tons of friends who have also experienced incidents of racial bias on campus. So personally, I have a scholarship to Villanova, and I have been told countless times that the only reason that I have that scholarship is because I'm Black. It happens to be a scholarship that is reserved for underrepresented students, but 6 out of the 28 of them, I believe, are reserved for underrepresented students. But that group of underrepresented students is at the same level as any other student who is in that cohort. So that's one example. I feel like that example is I feel like it's pretty low level compared to some of the things and the stories that I've heard from my friends and other people in particularly the Black community at Villanova. But I feel like almost every Black person has some kind of experience like that where they have been targeted for their race.
Yeah, I think that being biracial, I have a different set of experiences, but I think often at Villanova, I struggle with and I think Michelle has expressed this kind of feeling too, of feeling you're caught between two different communities, like you're caught between the Black community and you're caught between the larger Villanova community that kind of excludes that Black community. And so I have often been called whitewashed for being in certain organizations that I'm in. I think that people think I'm tokenized, or that people think that, organizations are forefronting my voice just because I'm like the diversity of the group. And that's been a challenge of feeling like people think I'm being asked to speak for my group, or people think that I'm representing my identity, like my identity group in any way. So that's been challenging. In class, I've been asked to speak for the Black identity before, and that has been a real challenge, especially when you're the only Black person in the room pretty much in every class. So yeah, I think that there is I could name 20 different instances of racism and racial issues that have impacted me, or probably more than that in my 3 years, which is sad. But I feel like, people of darker complexions can name even more than me, which is even worse.
Yeah, so just to go off of that, for me, my experiences are obviously very different from what someone who's biracial or Black experiences, but I guess where my incidences more focus on is I'm fluent in Spanish. I was raised bilingual, so if I'll be on the phone, calling my mom, walking back from class, I will get, and speaking to her in Spanish, I will get looks, and I will get kind of these disapproving stares, which at first was really impactful for me, because it was a shock to feel uncomfortable talking to my mom and something that was so comfortable for me. So I guess in terms of that, I have received kind of people assuming I'm an international student just because I speak a different language to my mom over the phone and giving me those dirty looks. But in terms of other instances, I do have a lot of friends who have suffered a lot more severe and different experiences as well.
Yeah, and so thank all three of you for sharing those experiences. So on account of race, I'm a white student at Villanova. I know this is a question that comes a little bit later that we'll talk about, but I have not experienced these stories, though I know that they are very valid. And I think that is a big reason why I've joined Get Woke Nova and stayed with it is these things happen. We receive stories frequently, and all of them are unique, but kind of underlying issues of racism, sexism, classism. So I think it is an unfortunate part of the Villanova community, but it is a big part of the Villanova community.
All right, well, thank you for sharing those experiences. So recently there's been a lot of call to action from the school, or to the school. Do you feel as if there is something concrete that the school can do in order to help with anti-racism efforts?
For sure. I think that there are a number of concrete ways that Villanova can really shift, I think, their culture. And recently we put out a list of demands on our social media platform. And I think that a number of those are really great ways to get started. They're definitely not the end all be all, but I think that disarming public safety is a big way that we can move toward that. Requiring diversity kind of requirement classes within every major and in every kind of college is a really big way that we can be anti-racist. But there are so many different ways I think that we can tackle these issues. So it's kind of hard to like give you one specific answer, but I'd like to see Villanova, and I know that they are taking concrete actions toward that, but I'd like to see a really comprehensive plan put out on within the next, few months even, of what they're going to do in a year to make these changes.
Yeah, I think one thing that I would like to see is just to see that, at least in the Black community, it's about 5% throughout the whole Villanova population. So that out of 7,000, that's like under 300, I'm pretty sure, or like right around that. So I would definitely like to see that percentage go up, as well as the percentage of Black faculty, because I think that's pretty low. In my 3 years of Villanova, I have maybe had 1 or 2 Black professors out of 3 years, like 6 full semesters of coursework. So that's something I'd like to see. I'd also love to see a designated space for Black students on campus. I think that is something that a lot of other schools that Villanova, I think, aspires to be like, have. So those are a few things just to add on to Chloe's little list there.
So part of the recent dialogue has been specifically about police brutality. And Chloe touched on this a little bit, but with regard to public safety and law enforcement on campus, have you ever noticed any sort of differing treatment from public safety or any law enforcement to a student of color on campus?
Yeah, these aren't my own experiences, and they're things I've definitely heard from other students, though. Mm-hmm. I've had friends who have been stopped by public safety for looking suspicious on campus, and then been kind of held and questioned, which is an extremely traumatic experience. I also have heard of experiences where students of color have had their rooms searched for like substances, basically, and they felt it was because of their color. And that's definitely a valid feeling, is feeling that you're being stopped stopped or searched because of the color of your skin. And it's definitely, I think, a really important thing for us to work on moving away from. And it's traumatic. I think it's really, really traumatic for students of color to be on campus and feel like at any time they could be shot by our public safety officers. But I'm sure other members can add to that.
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of it, Chloe. I think that there have been a number of stories that I've heard about people getting stopped by public safety, kind of people assuming that public safety, like that having calls for different substances and assuming that it was coming from whatever the smell was coming from the only Black student on the floor's room. And I think that, when we're constantly bombarded by images of things that police do to Black people that often result in death, that is, you internalize that and project that out to like if you're in that situation with a public safety officer. So I think that is kind of where some of that trauma that Chloe talked about comes from. So, I think that I think Black Villanova has done a really good job of posting a number of stories related to public safety. So I think that those really need to be taken seriously, because there's no reason why you should not feel safe on your own campus. And as a Black student, and especially not by people who are supposed to protect you too, you should not feel threatened by that group. So.
All right, well, thank you for sharing that. So have you guys had any involvement with the protest or the movement at large? And what are some things that the Villanova community can do to get more involved, like whether it's students or organizations like VTV or faculty? What can we do to help?
I think that intrinsically our campaign is connected to the movement, just because we do amplify voices of students of color, and Black voices, are included in that. And so in that way, we are absolutely connected to the Black Lives Matter movement, because we do recognize, I think the disparate impact that racism does have on students of color and Black students in particular. I think that moving forward, I am really hoping that the energy of the white Villanova population kind of stays really high, and we see a lot of movement in that area when we're back on campus. I'd love to see, protests on campus, which I think we don't see often, if at all, because Villanova is often, I think, apathetic to social issues that impact Black and brown communities. So that's a big thing I'd like to see. And I'd like to see more reform in spaces that are not traditionally Black and brown, right? So for me, that's working with my own sorority and Greek life to improve recruitment and inclusion of Black and brown, students of color within our Greek life organization. So how are we creating more equitable spaces? But yeah, I think that's one example.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, I'd say as a member of the white Villanova community, and I shared this with the group recently actually. So there's a lot of us, but sometimes it just feels like there's very few that are willing to, or before at least this movement and the recent events of this movement, I guess you could say. There just hasn't been a lot of action. There hasn't been a lot of people speaking out. And we definitely work to change that and to encourage more white students to be active allies when it comes to being anti-racist. So I think students, faculty, and staff within their own spheres, I guess speaking directly to those people right now, I think it's important to take a second and think, what is a concrete list of things myself or my organization or my office or my department or my classroom can do to move forward and be more actively anti-racist, rather than just post something on social media. What steps can we take on campus to make these changes that are necessary?
Yeah, and I think just adding to that, I think it's especially important for students in the majority at Villanova to continue to have these conversations amongst their own circles. I find that a lot of times Villanova University itself and the students at Villanova rely on students of color to push these conversations forward, which can be really exhausting when not only are you driving the conversation and driving action, but you're also facing the discrimination that comes with being a student of color on a campus like Villanova's. So I would say that, what are you, if you're a white student, what are you doing when there's no students of color in the room? Are you still having those conversations? Are you calling friends out when maybe they say something that's racist or questionable, when even if there's not a person of color in the room that could take offense to that? So think about what you're doing just outside of spaces where there are students of color, and how those actions can lead to effective anti-racism on campus.
Yeah, so I'd say for me personally, what I've been doing aside from working with Get Woke Nova and just educating myself every day, I recently have joined SPO as the diversity and inclusion chair. So it's like their first year of having this, and I'd say that the recent events that happened um, have acted like a catalyst for the initiatives that we've put into place, and just trying to emphasize that the message of inclusion carries beyond people with disabilities. It's the message of inclusion is just for any human in general. So I guess we've just been working really hard to create a space where we can educate the members of committee who are majority white, and how they can be active allies, how they can continue to educate themselves, identify your unconscious biases, because we all have them. So it's important to identify them and work on them in order to move forward and have some spark of change in our society.
All right, so many students have pointed out that Villanova has a lot of, or disproportionately has a lot of white students, and you guys have mentioned this throughout the interview. Do you feel as if Villanova's demographics prevent it from being a more accessible school for minority groups, or being able to effectively act upon current issues?
I don't think it has to, but it certainly does. I think that anti-racism is, everyone is capable of anti-racism. It's just a question of whether you are willing to educate yourself and do the work and have perhaps uncomfortable conversations. Because for some people, those things kind of really aren't an option. So I think that Villanova, the current Villanova community, can do more. But I also think it is important moving forward, I think, as has been mentioned, to increase the number of students of color on campus, specifically the Black community, with like targeted admissions programs. That's something that we've also called for through Get Woke Nova. But again, I don't think it's impossible currently.
All right, so now we're reaching the last set of questions. So recently we've had a lot of different responses to the recent murder of George Floyd from the school community, largely in the form of long emails from Father Peter. What has your reaction been to the university's response to the recent events?
I can start. I think that it's nice to have all of these words about what's going on, and that the university stands by students of color, Black students in particular. But I think that until the words turn into action, that we see change in the university's policies, curriculum, behaviors on campus, I feel like I take the words with a grain of salt personally. But I think that I am more hopeful, I think, than I've been in past years, that we can see like big institutional changes happen at Villanova to combat issues of racism. But I think that I personally will believe those things when I see the change happen.
Yeah, and to add to that, our like last 4-year strategic plan that just kind of launched this past year, it was really focused, I think, on improving DEI efforts on campus, but I hope that this event serves as a catalyst for them to make those changes far quicker than I think they would have done in the past. And I think that you've seen across the board with organizations and companies and institutions that it is pushing them, I think, and pressuring them to make these changes quicker, because I think that often predominantly white institutions, they just ask us to wait for change to happen, and they're like, this isn't the right moment. But I think that this is the right moment to be making these changes and to do it as quickly as possible. So I mean, my hope is that these conversations are happening kind of behind the scenes, and we haven't heard exactly all of the policies and practices that will be changing or being reformed or developed. But my hope is that when we come back to campus, we'll see a huge difference.
All right, thank you for sharing that. So my final question, we definitely touched on this a lot throughout the interview, but what are some steps that the university community, including just regular students, like the average Joe on campus, what can we do to ensure a more inclusive environment in the future?
I think a big step is educating yourself, right? And I think that a lot of predominantly white students are doing that right now. But I think educating yourself goes beyond just like reading books or um, looking at tips of how to be a better ally. And so it's taking that education out of, I think, the social media sphere and into like your real life conversations. So a big part, I think, of educating yourself is surrounding yourself with people who look different than you and have different perspectives and opinions and life experiences and learning from those experiences. So I think that that is one pretty easy step I'd like to see Villanovans do is, I think statistically, like 1 in 4 white people, like, in the United States don't have a friend of color. Like they don't surround themselves with people of color. And so I think that's a really easy thing to do is like reach out to people who aren't in your, your circle and develop friends in spaces that you wouldn't normally be in. And then you can really easily learn from their experiences.
Yeah. And I feel like you can do that in an authentic way. Like you don't have to be like, like I have no Black friends. Like I really need a Black friend. And then you go to like a big Black event and try to like hunt one down. Like that's not at all what Chloe's saying. I think that, you can be intentional about creating a diverse circle around yourself with people that you enjoy being around for other reasons than what they can give you. Also be thinking about what you can give them as well.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing. This marks the end of our interview. Is there anything else that you guys want to put out there or share with the Villanova community that you think people need to hear?
Yeah, I think that the main thing, Michelle Charles on this call, she has been saying this phrase for a while, and I really like it, so I'm going to use it right now. Flatten the curve on, your enthusiasm around anti-racist initiatives and practices, right? So we want, I think, white enthusiasm around this issue to last as long as possible. And I think that you've heard a lot about like allyship fatigue and like activism fatigue. And it is a real thing when you do get exhausted when you're doing this work, day in and day out. I think all of us do. But it's really rewarding, work to be doing. And the way I think to maintain that towards, real long-term change is to have a balanced approach in your activism and in your allyship. So really making sure that you're being intentional about your allyship and intentional about your activism and not just having it be a one-time thing or, I'm just going to do this, right after George Floyd's death kind of thing. It's how can we bring this into our everyday kind of interactions, our everyday practices, and especially within the Villanova community, when we come back to campus, how can we really make systemic change? And that only happens, I think, if you have a balanced approach to your activism.
Yeah, and going off of that, I think the reason why I say that we need to collectively, but then especially with kind of all of this energy from white people around anti-racism that has sprung up in the past, I'd say month or month and a half, is because fighting systemic and institutional racism takes a long time. Like even if the university was to completely overhaul its diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, changing a culture takes years and years and years. So, I think that now is a great time to really make a lot of pushes forward. But in order to sustain that, we need to like flatten the curve on this enthusiasm so we can dry out over the maximum amount of time possible. So I think that, I would say to Villanovans, like make sure that you're in this for the long haul and not just right now while it's trendy.
Does anybody else have anything else to add or anything?
I would just say follow us on social media at Get Woke Nova on everything.
Yes, of course.
Shameless plug.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your perspectives. We hope that this interview will help open more dialogue about racism and other social issues on campus. I'm Miguel Badia. This is Get Woke Nova. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.